The Xfinity 5-year price guarantee. You get 5 years of the most reliable Wi-Fi with our best equipment included for a price that stays exactly the same.
Hi everyone, welcome to Inquirer Live at Gameday Central, sponsored by Xfinity. Alongside Jeff McLane, I am Olivia Reiner. We are coming at you from the Arrowhead Stadium press box, getting set for the Super Bowl rematch between the Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs. Jeff, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Olivia. Happy to be here, back at Arrowhead Stadium for what seems like more than the usual, because the Eagles are now playing the Chiefs for the 5th straight year. I know all those games haven't been here, but this is the second time in the last 3 years that they're playing against each other here, and this is a great environment for a game, old school college football type feel, and maybe they'll end the way it ended 2 years ago with the Eagles' victory.
Last time we were here a couple seasons ago, I seem to remember there being rain in the forecast. This time it is a hot one. This is reminiscent a little bit of Week 4 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last year. We'll see if the Eagles are able to fare better in the heat. But before we get into everything today, just a reminder for all of you watching at home, you can be a part of our conversation, whether you're watching us over on YouTube, X, Facebook. Leave us a question in the chat. If you're over on Inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day as well, you can leave us a question in the comments. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll get to some of your questions throughout our show today. All right, Jeff, as we already mentioned, it is the Super Bowl rematch. It was 217 days ago that the Eagles beat the Chiefs down in New Orleans 40-22. It feels like it was just yesterday, to be honest. It's pretty unbelievable and remarkable that here we are getting set to see that rematch again. And now the Eagles are coming off of a narrow win over the Dallas Cowboys last week, 24-20. The Chiefs did not have as much success. They went down to Sao Paulo, Brazil, just like the Eagles did to open last season, where they were upset by the Los Angeles Chargers 27-21. I would say that the big concern coming out of that game for the Chiefs was a lot of communication errors, and Justin Herbert was able to really thrive in that game. So this is a Chiefs team that is coming into the stadium. They're going to be hungry. When you compare these two teams and how things ended last season with the Eagles winning the Super Bowl and coming in and winning Week 1 as well, are the Eagles still the team to beat going into today's game?
Well, the road favorites, which you typically don't see against a Chiefs team with Andy Reid as head coach and Patrick Mahomes at quarterback. So that tells you what the bettors are thinking about the Eagles coming into this game. They didn't play particularly great. It wasn't clean in the season opener. But there was a lot to like about the way they performed. The Chiefs, as you mentioned, had their struggles, and they have some key injuries or key losses at the wide receiver position, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But all that being said, Andy Reid knows how to win, right? He's done it almost 300 times in his career. Patrick Mahomes is dangerous week in and week out, and I know those are very general statements, but you go beyond that, and they still have a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball. Chris Jones is going to be a headache for the Eagles up front. Trent McDuffie is a top cornerback, and then on offense, Travis Kelce may be aging. He may have lost a half step, but he will definitely draw the Eagles' attention because they're without, as I said, their top two receivers, Rashid Rice and Xavier Worthy, who just dislocated his shoulder last week, and he has been ruled out.
The Chiefs are not the only team that are dealing with some injuries right now. So are the Eagles. They are going into today's game without Will Shipley, without Dallas Goedert, and we just got the inactives list too. Tanner McKee is listed as inactive, but he is the emergency third quarterback, so that indicates that Sam Howell will be backing up Jalen Hurts, and McKee is there in an emergency basis. So those are some of the big notable injuries. Let's stick with Goedert, though, because, of course, that is the big name. He popped up on the injury report this week with a knee issue, and he was their most targeted receiver in Week 1 against the Dallas Cowboys. He had 7 catches for 44 yards on a pretty light day in the passing game. Not only is he a real threat in the passing game and something that Nick Sirianni always says that this offense runs through Devontae Smith, through A.J. Brown, and through Dallas Goedert. So he is clearly, obviously, a factor in the passing game, but also in the run game too. He has emerged as he has been one of the Eagles' the best blocking tight end among the group. Specifically, they're going to have Grant Calcaterra, Kylan Granson, and practice squad call-up Cam Latu available to them today. When you look at how this offense, how things might shake out today for the Eagles' offense, how does Dallas Goedert's, the fact that he isn't going to be playing today, is that going to impact the Eagles more from a passing offense perspective or from a rushing offense perspective?
Well, I think both, clearly. I mean, he's the best receiving tight end. He's the best blocking tight end. What I will say is I was surprised that they went as much with 12 and 13 personnel as they did in the first game. They do play a fair amount of 12, at least they did last year, because, Grant Calcaterra isn't the greatest blocker, but he's not bad. He really got exposed in the opener at times with his run blocking. But the Eagles, they love to run out at 11 personnel. I mean, they were the best team at doing that with 3 wide receivers last year. So I'd expect them to get back to that. And certainly without Dallas Goedert, that tells you, that leads to my belief that they'll go back to a lot of running out of 11. You want to get the Chiefs in the nickel personnel, I believe, and take advantage of, what they have at those positions. And you can always throw out of, obviously, 11. Maybe that gives A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith more opportunities, and Jahan Dotson, who really didn't play. He played well last week, but only played like about half the snaps. So there's that part of it. But there's also, can Grant, step in and do what Dallas can as a receiver. And, Dallas missed, 5 games last year. And there was a period there where Grant had to step in and do it. And he did it capably, at times having big catches. So that's all part of the equation here when you're looking at that tight end position. But I think that it's probably not going to hurt them as much as some of the other positions, just because of what they can do in 11 personnel.
So we're not expecting to see Goedert out there. However, Jaylen Carter returns in this game. So we are expecting to see him out there, barring any other incident. He was ejected, as you all may know, after spitting on Dak Prescott. He ultimately was fined a game check, and the way that the NFL pretty much worded their statement in the aftermath of the decision on their ruling was that he had already served a suspension by not playing the entire game, seeing as the infraction came before the defense even played a snap. So when we asked Sirianni, following all of this, how the Eagles were going to handle any sort of discipline for Jaylen Carter, he was very mum about it, said that they would keep all discipline in-house. And it's interesting, you go back and you look at some of the Jaylen Carter's track record and some of his other transgressions over the course of his very young career. Last year, when he was late for a defensive meeting, he ultimately ended up sitting out the opening drive, week 2, against the Atlanta Falcons. Jeff, I'm curious. I kind of have 2 questions for you. 1, do you expect to see any sort of discipline in today's game for Jaylen Carter? And 2, just generally, how big is it that the Eagles are getting him back for this game? And how do you think not only impact the Eagles rush, which was relatively, so the entire defense as a whole, especially in the secondary, getting a little bit more from the pass rush up front?
Yeah, in terms of Jaylen and discipline, I don't know for certain what's going to happen here. My educated guess is that they won't bench him for the first drive. I know it happened for kind of a less offense last year when he was late for a practice. When you do that, you're publicly letting everybody know that there's a reason why Jaylen Carter isn't out there, and that just put my radar up to try and find out why. Was it a little Harry High School to not let him start against the Saints last year? Or was it the Falcons? I think it was the Falcons. Yeah, the Falcons game.
It was the Falcons. Yep.
Yeah, and I think you have to think about the rest of the team. It's just hey, come on, we're trying to win a game here. We need Jaylen. You saw what happened right when he left last week. The Cowboys went right down the field and scored on them. The league kicking, him getting ejected from the game, being fined a game check, is that enough? From what I understand, look, Nick Sirianni sat down with Jaylen on Friday after the game, and they heard what they wanted to hear from him. Kudos to him for standing at his locker stall after the game and answering questions about it and saying this is something I can't do. All that being said, this is a guy that has a little bit of a track record, and the team has to be careful about him. As we spoke about the story I wrote heading into the season about Jaylen being focused, about Jaylen, while he does bring a certain edge to that defense, nastiness is the word I used. Vic Fangio didn't like it, and that's what he did to Dak Prescott, and it got him kicked out of the game. So there's a thin line there that he has to toe, and the Eagles want to make sure that he got the message. And in terms of how it's going to affect the defense, I mean, he's the guy up front. I mean, he's the best not only up front, but I think everything goes through him defensively, because if he's getting doubled, other guys are getting freed up for one-on-ones, and then that, the pass rush in terms of getting to Patrick Mahomes, helps out the back end. If he's not in there, you can just double whoever else you want, and then it just becomes more difficult for the Eagles to get to the quarterback. So we'll see how he does. I'm sure he's going to come out and with something to prove. I wouldn't be surprised if he has a good game.
If there's anyone who could benefit from the Eagles defense being at full strength, it might be Adoree Jackson, who is coming off of a shaky debut as the starting outside cornerback opposite Quinyon Mitchell. Last week against the Cowboys, he allowed 5 passes for 103 yards. The vast majority of that damage was inflicted by CeeDee Lamb, who had 3 receptions for 72 yards. And now, Jeff, as you already mentioned, the Chiefs are going to be down 2 of their top receivers in Rashee Rice, who's been suspended for the first 6 games of the season, and Xavier Worthy, who was injured third play of the game against the Chargers. So this is a very different receiving core that Patrick Mahomes is going to be working with. That said, it's still Patrick Mahomes, and he is still able to create magic regardless of who is out there. When we talked to Vic Fangio earlier this week on Tuesday, he said that for now the plan is to still roll with Adoree Jackson, starting out outside cornerback. However, it's been several days. Things could have changed since then. Do you still expect to see Jackson starting out there, or do you feel like a change is imminent?
It could be. I mean, they may have no other choice if he can't play defense. The key phrase in Vic Fangio's response when asked about Adoree was "right now." Right, as you brought up. I mean, that could just change later that day when they actually had their first practice. We'll see when they come out here and do their warm-ups. We'll probably get a better indication. From what I've been told, it's like, don't be surprised to see Jacorian Bennett out there. Whether it's starting this game or it's at some point, because I know that Adoree's got the experience, and you kind of rely on that when you put a guy into that spot. But it's just he plays soft. I think the speed is a concern, or the lack thereof. It may not hurt as much this game as you mentioned. Hollywood Brown, I mean, he does have speed. He's a veteran, savvy guy. I mean, you have to be worried about him. Juju Smith-Schuster is a different type of receiver. We all know about Travis Kelce. Obviously, that's more the safeties and the linebackers covering him. But it's all connected to in some regard. And Adoree, right now, I think the Eagles defense, Fangio, they just probably don't feel 100% confident about him.
We'll see if they decide to start with Jackson, if they end up pulling him, how leash is. Bennett had a little bit of a look in that game, that opening the first week of the season, going in there for Jackson, taking about 7 snaps while Jackson was being evaluated for a concussion, ultimately was able to come back into the game. But you think back to that moment, and Bennett, his very first play was called for pass interference. So he has some room to grow too. We'll see what ends up happening at that outside cornerback spot opposite Mitchell. As we already mentioned and we've discussed, I mean, Patrick Mahomes, even though he is down his top 2 receivers and is coming off of a loss to the Chargers, he is still quite the quarterback, and he still has it. There's no doubt about that. And just watching back that game against the Chargers, you're reminded all of the things you know about Patrick Mahomes. Still adept at extending plays, and he's still really dangerous with his. He scrambled 6 times for 57 yards, picked up 5 first downs as a byproduct of that. Something that does stand out about Mahomes compared to who he was earlier in his career. He seems more inconsistent with his deep ball. He only hit 50% of his passes beyond 20 yards in that opening game against the Chargers. When you think about how this Eagles secondary and especially the guys up front too in containing Mahomes in the pocket, when you think about how this Eagles defense is constructed, how well do you feel like they are equipped to take away some of the strengths that Mahomes possesses in today's game?
Yeah, I think part of the reason why Patrick Mahomes isn't as good deep anymore is because he doesn't have a guy named Tyreek Hill at the other end of those throws. That's part of it. When they let him go, they decided, in terms of salary cap allocation to go weaker at the wide receiver position, which Eagles fans know a lot about when it comes to Andy Reid and how he constructs his roster. All that being said, I think it's going to be up front. It's going to be, do the Eagles have to blitz at some point? They didn't blitz once in the Super Bowl. That was obviously key to them stopping Mahomes and winning that game. If you can just get to the quarterback with a 4-man rush, it's just going to make things so much easier in your back seven. So Vic would love to be able to do that again. Can he do that again? I don't know. The horses up front just aren't the same. There's no Josh Sweat. There's no Milton Williams. There's no Brandon Graham. They still have good players. Nolan Smith and Jelix Hunt. I thought they had some good moments in that first game. Look, you look at this Chiefs offensive line. They remade the left side, and that was a major issue for them in that Super Bowl and in the games prior to that. But there's still a lot of question marks. Jawan Taylor, on the other side at right tackle, he's a guy I think the Eagles can expose. They're very strong in the middle. Creed Humphrey's one of the better centers in the league, and Trey Smith is one of the better guards. So we'll see how the Eagles, allocate their rush and how, games, maybe the Eagles don't typically do a lot of that, but maybe that works against this front. So if you can get to Mahomes and make him extend play, keep him contained, as you mentioned, within the pocket, look, he's going to burn you sometimes by with his legs, whether he's running or whether it's just dancing around in the pocket, readjusting himself and making throws when things break down in the secondary. But they got to get to him. That's the key.
Let's flip it over to the offensive side of the ball. And ultimately, last week, the Eagles did enough to win the game. I think you can say that about them. And really, I would say Jaylen Hurts did enough to win the game. He was pretty remarkable passer and, of course, as a rusher as well. The big thing that needs to change this week is getting the ball in A.J. Brown's hands. Last week, he only had one reception on one target for 8 yards, and ultimately that came toward the very end of the game. It was ultimately ended up being a critical catch that he made, still not as involved in the offense as the Eagles would certainly like him to be, and what is going to be viable for their success this season. Brown, and going back and watching the game, and Brown said it himself after the game too, it was clear that he was bracketed for a good chunk of the game. The Cowboys played a ton of zone coverage, which kind of broke their tendency from last season when they played a bit more man. And ultimately, Hurts just took what was available to him underneath, and that's kind of how the story went. When you look at this matchup against this Chiefs defense in their secondary in particular, do you expect them to similar approach that the Cowboys did last week? And how can the Eagles really get Brown freed up to manufacture some more touches for him in week 2?
Yeah, you have to be careful about doing that on a week-to-week basis. Obviously, it's a different team, different defensive coordinator, Steve Spagnuolo. Look, if you're going to double AJ, you got to take your chances with Devontae Smith and one-on-ones, and we all know what he can do. Look, they zoned them. The Cowboys zoned the Eagles' offense to death last week. I don't think they played man coverage on one play. Spags likes to play a fair amount of man, so that's just red meat for AJ. And I think we'll see what we saw probably in the season opener 4 years ago when Devontae Smith didn't get a catch. The following week, first pass, Jalen Hurts drops back. There's a short underneath route to Smith, and maybe don't be that obvious on the first play, but they want to get AJ Brown started. Look, this offense is better if he's involved. If not only just in terms of what he can do, but it opens things up for everybody else. Look, they didn't want to do that last week, and I know that there's been some talk about AJ not looking healthy. I talked to him on Wednesday. He says he's 100% fine. Maybe later in the game when it was obvious the ball wasn't going to come to him because he was getting doubled, maybe he was a little disinterested in terms of how he ran the routes, and that's why he didn't look as explosive on film. He can't let that affect him, and I think to some extent he didn't, as you mentioned on that last catch, the only catch that he had with under 2 minutes left in the game. But look, they gotta run. They gotta have better answers versus zone. Teams are going to zone them a lot early in the season, and Kevin Patullo, it's his second game now as the play caller. I think he needs to do a better job of finding ways to get in the ball. It's a pretty obvious statement, but you can't go week to week with A.J. Brown not being as involved.
When Saquon Barkley was asked about Brown and his lack of targets and how he handled himself in the aftermath, Saquon also said, hey, listen, I didn't exactly have the game that I wanted to, and you kind of just have to, reiterating the Jalen Hurts of it all, do what it takes to win and move forward. And watching that game last week was kind of for Barkley in a way of what happened in Super Bowl. Except for this time, the Cowboys really committed to loading up the box. They loaded up the box on 66.7% of Barkley's carries, limiting him to just 60 yards on 18 carries. Watching back that game, it seemed like the blocking was not up to snuff, and Jordan Mailata told me after in the locker room this past week that it wasn't, and they feel like they are one block away looking at the film. That's how they felt, just kind of in the aftermath of dissecting what went wrong. And Saquon kind of agreed with him. So when you look at this Chiefs team, they obviously had a lot of success limiting Barkley in the Super Bowl. They continue to have that success last week when they went up against the Chargers. Rookie running back Omarion Hampton was held to 48 yards on 15 carries. So a really quiet night for him, even though the Chargers were still able to win it thanks to the arm of Justin Herbert. When you look at this team's running woes that they've had over the last two games, which are uncharacteristic compared to how Saquon Barkley performed the majority of last season, do you feel like these things are fixable, or are they a sign of what's to come this season?
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of both. I mean, there's no doubt that the Eagles knew this, and everybody knew it, that Saquon Barkley, based upon the success he had last year, was going to see more attention. Now, some of the the stacked boxes that they saw last week was because of the personnel that the Eagles used, and because they had a lot of stacked formations, which allowed the Chiefs to the Cowboys almost played into their strength. So again, didn't really understand kind of running up the middle as much at that point. And it hurt them later in the game. Look, if you're going to have heavy personnel, you're going to run a little bit. That should set up play action down the field, and we just didn't see that except for one deep throw. So as we talked about earlier, I think it's going to be a lot of 3 receiver sets. It's going to be a lot of 11 personnel, and that's going to be the Eagles' kind of answer to what the Chiefs can do in terms of the run defense. But as you mentioned in the Super Bowl, they were able to stop Saquon Barkley, but Jalen Hurts gashed him, and they'll take that again. They took it last week. I thought Jalen had one of his best games of his entire career last week, based upon just the discipline in which he played, the decision-making. I didn't see many mistakes out there. And, that's a great sign here early in the season. Is Spags going to do the same thing he did in the Super Bowl? You would think not, based upon what Hurts had done. But, look, this offense runs. I still think a lot of it just runs through what Saquon can do on the ground. And I think the Eagles still want to do a lot to establish him early in the games. So it will be interesting to see how much Spagnuolo does to turn the attention towards stopping Barkley.
All right, Jeff, let's flip it over to our player picks. We've discussed plenty of players so far on today's show. However, if there's one that you're going to be keeping an eye on in particular in today's game, who would it be?
Yeah, Jahad Campbell's going to be my guy. And, he played really well in his first NFL game, especially in coverage. I mean, that play he made on that post route, had a drop in the middle, pass break up. And I saw other times when he was dropping into coverage, just the athleticism, the explosiveness, run defense, maybe not quite all the way where he wants to be. But, I mean, first game, he'll get it. The instincts will come the more he plays at that spot. And it'll be interesting to see how the Eagles deploy him. Vic Fangio deploys him today, and whether he's involved in covering Travis Kelce. We really haven't mentioned him much. I know that, we did mention obviously the age and maybe a half step slower than he used to be, but he's still kind of, the guy for Travis, just because they've played together so well. The chemistry is unbelievable. They know how to, when things do break down, how to find each other. Travis unbelievable route runner, knows how to break off of a certain route and go where, into an empty spot where he knows Patrick will find him. So what are the Eagles going to do? Are they going to double him like they have in the past? Are they going to have, typically have a safety or maybe even a slot corner, Cooper DeJean, on him? Probably. I wouldn't be surprised to see Campbell maybe spend some time covering Kelsey, because if you can do that with a linebacker, that really opens up what the rest of the secondary can do.
That he can certainly definitely an impressive performance for Campbell as he gets off to his rookie campaign. All right, and I'm one player. I'm going to go with two players. Very interested to see how the Eagles pass rush responds this week after being unable to go after and sack Dak Prescott last week. How are they going to fare against Mahomes to break the pocket and to create some things with his legs? That's my big questions. But my players to watch are going to be both Josh Uche and Zadarius Smith. Zadarius Smith obviously coming in now after signing with the team on Friday after the game as a free agent, and he brings a veteran presence to this, are looking to potentially fill that Brandon Graham type of leadership role. But with Smith too, even though he is getting up there in age and I covered him back in Green Bay when he was there in 2019 and 2020, and it's been a long time since then, but he is still showing that he has some pass rush juice left. He had 9 sacks last year with the Cleveland Browns, who then flipped him to the Detroit Lions at the trade deadline. So I'm very curious to see how he performs potentially in his first game, and how much he ultimately is able to play. And then I'm also really interested to see how Josh Uche performs also after last week's performance against he came from the Patriots, but against the Cowboys. He was, although he was not able to hit Prescott, he was in the backfield quite a bit. He took just 18 snaps, but he was quite effective on those snaps. He had a 43.8% pass rush win rate, according to Pro Football Focus, which led all defenders in the NFL with at least 18 pass rush snaps. So he was, like I said, he was back there just unable to bring down the quarterback. So we'll see if he is able to success and ultimately how much more he plays if, get see.
Well, I've gone 3-1 in the 4 previous times that the Eagles have played against the Chiefs, and I know maybe some think that I have a favoritism towards the Chiefs and away from the Eagles, but I did pick the Eagles in the Super Bowl, and of course they won in the Super Bowl prior. I picked the Chiefs and they won. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but I just want to bring a little context into why I made the picks that I have made before, and why I'm leaning to the Chiefs. Maybe not as confidently as I was when I made my preseason picks. I told myself, okay, as long as I, get them right, I'll probably stick with the way I picked it before the season. So that's part of the reason why I'm picking the Chiefs, and aside and all the other obvious reasons, right? Because Patrick Mahomes can kill you in so many different ways. I don't really think it matters a heck of a lot that Xavier Worthy isn't out there. Hollywood Brown's been around a long time. He can get it done. The same goes for Juju Smith-Schuster. Kelsey, I think he only had 2 catches last week, but he's always dangerous. I just kind of feel like in this rivalry, it's gone back and forth, and this is probably going to be another example of us seeing it go back towards the Chiefs. So I'm going to stay with my pick that I made before the season. I'm going to stick with the Chiefs, 26-24.
I'm also going to stick with the prediction that I made before the season. However, I picked the Eagles before the season started, so I'm rolling with the Eagles for this game. Eagles win 24-20. Close, however, the Chiefs, the game that I watched last week, and I understand week 1 is not going to look like all season, but I thought there were some red flags there, particularly on defense, as you mentioned, and as we've discussed at length. Patrick Mahomes is Patrick Mahomes, and he's capable of doing some incredible things regardless of who is out there on the field. But there's got to be some concern there about the Chiefs secondary with just how many breakdowns there were, how many wide open receivers there were for the Chargers. Perhaps, we'll see if that was just a fluke or if that is a sign for things to come for their unit. But for now, I'm rolling with the Eagles. It might be a little bit of a bold prediction that they are on the road. This is a Chiefs team that is going to be hungry for a win coming off of a loss down in Brazil, but still going to stick with the Eagles. I'm also going to flip it over here. Steven Kastman over on YouTube say that the Birds are going to walk away with a win 33-20, so a little bit of a bigger margin there for Steven. I think it's going to be a closer game, but we'll see what the final score ends up being. Everyone, that is going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for tuning in to Inquirer Live at Gameday Central, sponsored by Xfinity. Just a reminder, we will be over on Inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day chatting with you throughout the game. So if we weren't able to get to your comment or your question, we'll be over there all game, all afternoon, answering those down in the chat. So we look forward to seeing you over there in just a little bit.
And if you want any more Eagles insight, check out my podcast, Uncovering the Birds, where I take you behind the scenes each week with exclusive reporting, interviews, and everything you might have missed about your favorite team. Also, we're now going to 2 episodes per week, one the day after the game. And just last week, Olivia joined me. We had a really good time on that podcast. Mike Sealski will be joining me tomorrow. And then later in the week when we have one a little more traditional narrative series type podcast. So you can listen to Uncovering the Birds at Inquirer.com/podcast, wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I can't wait to listen to you and Mike. I'm sure you guys are going to have a good conversation. All right, everyone. Once again, that's it for us today. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.